We got sound? Ready to go? All right.
I'm fine, but I'm also Paul.
So, I got 5:59. I have 60 seconds. I'll just say, before we start on all of this has been really fun these last couple of weeks, because it actually, for me, has perfectly illustrated the principle that you never really know a subject until you have to teach it. And Herod was almost a placeholder in my big picture of history. I mean, Alexander the Great, I knew there were successor kingdoms. I knew there was a rebellion by the Maccabees. And then there's Herod the Great and Jesus. And I'm like, I don't know how you transition between those things, so I'm going to have to do some reading. So here's my reading up here. Herod's a little unusual. Usually, people with the appellation the Great attract biographers because people admire them. I've read these biographies. I don't think any of these people admire Herod. It's like writing a biography of Hitler or Stalin or Mao. It's like they're important. They did a lot of significant things. They had an impact that reverberates down the decades after their lives, but nobody likes them. So, with that little teaser, I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome once again. We're doing a monthly lecture. This is our May lecture. This is the 11th one that we have done. We'll lap ourselves. We'll get to the 12th next month in June, and then in July we'll start over again and do another 12. So, my name is Rob Shearer. I'm here on representing the Francis Schaeffer Study Center, and the topic for this month's lecture is Herod the Great, born 73 BC, died 4 BC, and yeah, there's a lot of interesting things to say about him, including, but not limited to, why does he have that appellation after his name? Why is he Herod the Great? So a bit about the Francis Schaeffer Study Center before we get started, because some people will be watching this as we record it. It is being streamed live, and it will be available on the church's YouTube channel and on the Francis Schaeffer Study Center YouTube channel. If you want to go back and review it, listen to it, watch it again, or if you want to recommend it to somebody, we would love that too. And if you do, we would appreciate very much if you go on our YouTube channel, if you would hit like and subscribe. Neither one costs you anything, but if you hit subscribe on a YouTube channel, it just means you're going to get a little notification when a new video is posted. And we're trying to post one a month. So if you'll hit like and subscribe, we will much appreciate it. The Schaeffer Study Center was founded 21 years ago. Its mission is to promote a biblical worldview through the study of history, literature, and art. It is named in honor of the theologian and apologist Francis Schaeffer, who lived from 1912 to 1984. And in some ways, he Christian academic culture. The idea that all truth is God's truth. I actually personally know of a dozen people who decided to pursue careers in academia because of Schaeffer's influence and impact on their lives. So in addition to these lectures, we offer a high school program for grades 8 through 12. And that high school program is built around an integrated chronological study of Western civilization. We begin with our kids in the ancient world and finish with the 20th century. And our last day of classes for this academic year is tomorrow. But there's space open for the fall classes if you are interested. And our graduates have gone on to do extremely well. We've had graduates go to Vanderbilt, UT Knoxville, MTSU, Belmont, Lipscomb, UT Chat. Austin Peay, my oldest grandchild, graduated last Friday from Austin Peay, summa cum laude, with a major in classics. So we're very proud of him. We've had at least one graduate go on and get an appointment to the Air Force Academy. And after graduating from the Air Force Academy, his first assignment was with Missile Command up in Montana. So one of my students had his hand on the button for a while. I don't know whether I feel good about that or not, but it's just one of those things. Yeah, I've been married for 47 years. I have 12 children, 3 sons, 9 daughters, 21 grandchildren so far. The oldest just graduated from college. There are 9 boys and 12 girls. I have academic degrees in history, both undergrad and graduate school from Davidson College and Stanford University. I've been a historian, a teacher, an author. I've taught at the college level. I was actually city manager here in Mount Juliet for 7 years. Please don't blame me for the traffic. We did our best, but it just kept growing. We run a little publishing company, and with my wife, I am the co-director of the Francis Schaeffer Study Center here. So you knew this question was coming, right? I always like to start, because this helps me tailor what I'm going to say. What is one thing you already know about Herod the Great?
He was not Jewish. He's Idumean.
He's not Jewish, he's Idumean. He would quibble. He's Idumean, but he's also Jewish. But yeah, he's not from one of the 12 tribes. He's not descended from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, or any of Jacob's sons. But he is Jewish. Anybody else know anything about him? He's mentioned in the New Testament. He's mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, and he's mentioned in the Gospel of Luke, although he gets only a kind of a one-line reference in Luke. There's a lengthy treatment of him in the book of Matthew, and it's not too favorable, as you might imagine, since he's the one who interacted with the wise men and is sort of obviously being hypocritical to them, saying, "Oh, tell me where this child is being born, that I may come and worship him too." And then the wise men, being warned, don't go back and tell him, but he figures out it was Bethlehem, and so he orders the slaughter of the children of Bethlehem, who are counted in Fox's Book of Martyrs and in the traditions of the early church as the first martyrs, the first Christian martyrs, were the children under 2 in Bethlehem. We actually have some pretty good sources for him. We actually have better sources for him than Alexander, although there are holes, there are fragments. I mentioned the chapter of Matthew. We have lengthy treatment of him from Josephus. Josephus is not a contemporary. Josephus was born after Herod the Great had already died, but he's pretty close in time. He's born only 40 years after Herod died, and he knows, because he grows up in Israel, a great deal of the history. We have an even more important source in a gentleman called Nicolaus of Damascus, who we think was a Jew, but who wrote in Greek and also in Latin, and he's kind of like the Forrest Gump of the 1st century BC. He seems to keep showing up everywhere with everybody. He is a friend and official for Herod the Great. He's a tutor to the children of Cleopatra and Mark Antony in Egypt. He is sent on embassies to Rome by Herod, and he wrote an autobiography of himself. He wrote a biography of Herod. His autobiography we have most of. The biography of Herod we don't have. He wrote a universal history of the world, which was much easier to do in the 1st century because there was less history to write about, but it's in 140 volumes, and we have about 6 of those volumes and a few quotations. 3 of the volumes were devoted to Herod, because he knew the story. He was in and out of the court of Herod at Jerusalem and traveled with Herod and went on diplomatic missions for Herod. Herod is mentioned in some of the Roman historians, Strabo, Tacitus, Suetonius, and doesn't get much favorable press there either. There's also quite a bit of archaeology, archaeological traces and some inscriptions and dedications and markers. Herod's name and his father's name are preserved in inscriptions to both of them in Rome, in Latin. We'll talk about the Roman connection here a little bit more. He minted coins, and we have some of those coins. And he was involved in some incredible building projects. I was looking over that earlier today. I counted 18 different building projects. Fortress palaces, new cities, marketplaces, and he contributed money and invested in construction projects in other major cities in the ancient world. He's recorded as having made huge gifts to refurbish the temples in Ephesus and in Athens and in Damascus and in Rome. And we'll talk about why he was able to do that as we go on. So, I'm going to do the historical context and This is my bent. I'm a root stretcher. We talk about different kinds of historians. They talk about the hedgehog and the fox. The fox knows many things, and the hedgehog knows one big thing. I'm more of a fox. I like assembling all these little details, and if I want to study somebody, I want to know, well, what was their childhood like? Who were their parents? Who were their grandparents? What was going on in the generation before them? So I'm going to do that for Herod in hopes that it will help all of us understand him a little bit better. I'm going to talk about the sources for Herod. Well, I just kind of did that. I'll give you an outline of his course of life and some anecdotes about him. His skillful alliances with Pompey, Mark Antony, and Octavian are very important, and there's some very interesting records of those. His massive building projects, I mentioned there are 18. I'm going to talk about 5 or 6 of them in some detail, just to give you a sense of what sorts of things he was interested in. And I'm going to talk about his paranoia and ruthless executions. His family life is a disaster, and his ancient biographers used exactly that phrase. We'll see as we get into it. But let's set the stage a little bit. We go back to the lecture from last month. This is the territory that Alexander conquered. The color shadings show how it sort of split up. Well, not Italy. Italia was separate. But Macedonia, Asia Minor, the old Persian Empire, and Egypt. And the successor rulers, because Hellenistic culture and Greek successor states are one of the lasting effects of Alexander's conquests, Greek literature, Greek architecture, Greek administrative structures, Ptolemy and the Septuagint, we talked about that. It's the conquest of Alexander that makes possible and actually directly responsible for the translation of the scrolls of the Old Testament into Greek around 250 BC. So in between all of these other kingdoms, the Ptolemaic Empire, the Seleucid Empire, the Parthian Empire, there's the Maccabean Kingdom, which had been part of the Persian Empire. You remember Cyrus, Nehemiah, and Ezra come back to Jerusalem after the 70 years exile in Babylon, and then Susa. And Nehemiah does not establish a nation. Actually, Ezra comes first. Neither of them establish a new kingdom. Nehemiah comes back actually as the Persian governor. He's leading the Jewish community, but he's appointed governor by the Persian emperor. He's the Persian governor of this territory. Ezra rebuilds the altar and the temple. Nehemiah rebuilds the walls of the city, but they're a province of the Persian Empire. So when Alexander conquers the Persian Empire, it includes that province. That becomes then a province of Alexander's empire, and then a province of these successor states. It's because it's right here halfway between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. These are both Greek generals, Greek nobles. Antioch is the capital for this Seleucid Empire. Alexandria is the capital for the Ptolemaic Empire. It's a border state. It's in that sort of space that's contested. And in fact, sometimes the Ptolemaic Empire sends troops to occupy it and claim that province as one of their provinces. Sometimes the King Antioch of the Seleucid Empire sends troops to occupy it, annex it, and claim it as his province. Both of these are Greek-speaking kingdoms because they're founded by successors to Alexander. And then a curious thing happens about 250 BC. The Greek emperor in Antioch sort of overreaches himself and decides he wants to build temples to Zeus through all of his provinces and temples to himself. And he wants all of the subjects in all the provinces that he rules to offer sacrifice to Zeus and to himself, Antiochus Epiphanes. And that provokes a rebellion. The Maccabean Hasmonean dynasty leads the rebellion against the Greeks out of Antioch. Mattathias has, and there are more than 5 sons, but the 5 sons are the prominent ones. This rebellion Mattathias initiates the revolt in 167 BC. Johanan, Simeon, Judah, Eleazar, and Jonathan, his sons, carried on after he is killed. Johanan actually becomes high priest after they get control of the temple, and then he is killed. Jonathan becomes high priest, and he is killed, and Simeon eventually becomes high priest until he is killed. And you don't really get a stable Hasmonean leadership of this new independent nation until you get to one of the grandsons of Mattathias, John Hyrcanus. He is high priest and the leader of the Jewish Commonwealth. He's a successful administrator, commander. He's high priest and what they call ethnarch. An ethnarch is kind of an invented term. It just means the ruler of an ethnic group. Think the same prefix, ethnarch, ethnic. So he is the leader of the Jews, and the Greek generals in Antioch and the Greek generals in Alexandria kind of don't want to mess with him because he's defeated their military units in the field. He does more than just defend the independence of a restored nation of Israel. They don't quite call it that. They call it the kingdom of the Jews. But he also expands the boundaries. He conquers and converts the Idumeans and the Hittites. And he rules for 30 years, which is a considerable length of time in the ancient world. In any nation, a 30-year rule is pretty impressive. He's really probably the most impressive ruler of the Maccabean. So the family is called the Maccabees or the Hasmoneans. They refer to the same family. High priest and ethnarch. Why not king of Israel? Well, it was really, there were objections from the Jews to anybody taking the title king of Israel because Mattathias and his sons were not descended from David and Solomon. They had no claim by descent to be the anointed kings of Israel. So they take the office of high priest. They are Levites, but they're not descended from David and Solomon. So the compromise later, Hyrcanus doesn't take this title. He takes high priest and ethnarch, but later the title king of the Jews. This is why Herod is king of the Jews and not the king of Israel. Because the king of Israel is supposed to be a descendant of David, and he's not. Hyrcanus has 3 sons, and it doesn't go well, as you might imagine. Aristobulus, Alexander Jannaeus, and Antigonus. Alexander Jannaeus marries Salome Alexandra. Actually, that's the Greek version of her name. The Hebrew version of her name is Shalom Zion. But that comes into the Greek as Salome. You can hear the sounds. Shalom Zion becomes Salome. And she marries into the family. So Aristobulus and his younger brother immediately fight after the death of their father. And Aristobulus has Antigonus killed, and then he dies only a year into his reign, leaving the only surviving son, Alexander Jannaeus. So Hyrcanus dies. Aristobulus takes the title because he's killed his youngest brother who opposed him. And then he dies, and Alexander Jannaeus, and he actually identifies with the Sadducees, and he rules for 27 years. So after a little turbulence here, after the death of John Hyrcanus, you have now 2 strong kings with long reigns, and then it kind of falls apart again because Jannaeus, when he dies, Shalom Zion decides she would like to rule in her own name, and she lets her sons, the sons of Alexander Jannaeus, her sons as well, they can take the title high priest, but she wants to be queen. And they're not happy. And they are constantly plotting and trying to figure out ways to overthrow her. Hyrcanus seeks support from the Romans. Aristobulus seeks support from the Parthians. He's eventually assassinated by Pompey. And Hyrcanus II, after a long checkered career, he's high priest, and then he goes into exile, and then he comes back, and then he doesn't really do much. He's actually executed by Herod, which is why we have to now switch and bring him into the mix. Yeah. I mentioned Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, both seeking outside support. There's actually a civil war going on between them because they each have the backing of foreign powers. Hyrcanus II has Romans on his side. Aristobulus has the Parthians. Hyrcanus II has a son, Alexandra. Aristobulus has a daughter. A son and a daughter. And they get married in an attempt to reconcile the two warring houses. This is like the Montagues and the Capulets. It doesn't work well. Alexandra, the daughter, is killed by Herod eventually, and Alexander is killed by Pompey. There is a Mattathias Antigonus, we'll talk about him. He goes and seeks help from the Parthians, and that doesn't work out well because the Romans are eventually going to dominate, and so he's killed by Mark Antony. And then Alexandra and Alexander, so they're first cousins, so you have a double royal descent for the Hasmonean family. They have two children, Aristobulus II, killed by Herod. Are you catching a theme here? And Miriam, who marries Herod and then is killed by him. So yeah, the number of people who have the little line killed by Herod in these genealogies is a little startling. All right, so now let's talk about, now that we've gotten through the Hasmonean dynasties and you sort of know what happened there as they successfully reestablished their independence, and with some turmoil and turbulence, there are a couple of strong rulers, and then there's some periods of unrest and outside interference. Here's Antipas is the grandfather of Herod. Antipas is an Idumean. When Hyrcanus conquered Idumea, he appointed Antipas, who was an Idumean chieftain, he appointed him as the royal governor of Idumea, and he actually became a military ally, something of a mercenary, because the Idumeans were rather well regarded for their skills fighting on horseback. Idumean cavalry had a reputation for great skill. His son is Antipater, and he's the cavalry commander for Hyrcanus, first for Alexander Jannaeus and Shalomcion, and then for Hyrcanus II, and he is such a successful warrior that he actually supplants Hyrcanus. He becomes a sort of de facto political power. And I'll talk about how he gets some of that. It's by a skillful selection of friends and allies. He is the father of Herod. So Herod comes out of this Idumean line that start out as conquered people but chieftains, conquered people but military commanders, mercenary soldiers, and Herod, whose father gets him the title governor of Galilee. The Idumeans are the descendants of Esau. Idumean is the adjective from Edom. So Edom, Idumean. So how did Herod the Idumean become governor of Galilee? This is how we get here. Herod's father, Antipater, general to Hyrcanus II, assisted Julius Caesar in his conquest of Egypt. Because Caesar, after he defeats his rivals in a big battle in Greece, comes down the coast of the Mediterranean and leads his legions into Egypt and intervenes there and is seduced and captivated by Cleopatra. But some of his military force is commanded by Antipater. Antipater brings some of his Idumean cavalry along with Julius Caesar for the campaign in Egypt. And Julius Caesar is very grateful. 48 BC. And Hyrcanus is high priest back in Jerusalem, and nobody's really paying much attention to him anymore. It's Antipater who is the leading figure Julius Caesar, as a reward, appointed Antipater as procurator of Judea, which is now a Roman province. Julius Caesar didn't really fight anybody because Antipater said, hey, let's be friends, let's be allies. I'll help you conquer Egypt. And because Antipater is procurator of Judea, Hyrcanus II remains as high priest because nobody's paying any attention to him. Julius Caesar granted Antipater Roman citizenship. This is something I did not know. It means Herod is a Roman citizen. He's Idumean. The Idumeans had converted to Judaism. His father is a general. His father is a friend of Julius Caesar's. And his father, the honors granted to Antipater are engraved on the Capitol in Rome. We have that inscription. Antipater arranges for his older son, Faisal, to be the governor of Jerusalem, and his younger son, Herod, to be governor of Galilee. Herod is 25 when all this goes down. Yep. Okay, so Caesar, of course, famously has only 4 or 5 years to live as first man in Rome. He is assassinated in 44 BC. Herod picks the losing horse in the succeeding conflict, Mark Antony, but it takes a while for things to sort out after Julius Caesar's death. There are 3 figures. There's Crassus, there's Mark Antony, and there's Octavian, who will be Caesar Augustus. Mark Antony's going to lose. He's a bad choice. But he's the one who takes over the eastern half of the Roman Empire. The provinces, including Judea and Egypt and Asia Minor, are Mark Antony's to administer, and so Herod figures, hey, he's the man. So in 44, he's backing Mark Antony. In 43 BC, Herod's father was assassinated. He was poisoned at a banquet. So now Herod and his older brother Faisal, the 2 brothers, are now governing 2 parts of Israel, but dad's gone. Herod arranged for the execution of his father's assassin by Roman soldiers in Tyre. His assassin was a Jewish nobleman from Jerusalem who was aligned with the Pharisee party and resented the fact that these Idumean upstarts were displacing the high priest and the high priestly family. In 40 BC, the Parthians invaded Judea, seeking to overthrow Herod and Faisal. They're the 2 brothers. They conquered Jerusalem. They took Faisal prisoner, Herod's older brother. Faisal committed suicide in prison. But now the Romans are not happy because Judea was supposed to be one of their provinces, part of their territory, one of their allies, one of their client states. And so Mark Antony says, well, we have to get the Parthians out of Judea. We can't have them. By the way, they're the ones that take Hyrcanus II off into exile. They put in a high priest in Jerusalem of their own choosing. Mark Antony says, yeah, this half of the empire is mine. We got to do something about this. And so, they install Mattathias Antigonus as king of the Jews in Jerusalem. Mark Antony says, no, we're not doing that. So Mark Antony takes Herod. Herod goes to Rome, apparently at the invitation of Mark Antony. Mark Antony is in Rome. And Mark Antony arranges for the Roman Senate to name Herod as king of the Jews so that he can be part of the Roman effort to push the Parthians back out of the province of Judea. And Herod's going to be the new client king. The rumors are, actually Josephus includes this in his history, that Herod offered Mark Antony an incredible bribe to make this happen, and that the money was used to bribe the senators, something on the order of $100 million worth of silver. And you may be asking yourself, how does Herod happen to have $100 million? Well, it's kind of a pledge of future revenue. He might have had $10 million cash on hand. He's basically promising Mark Antony, you make me king, I will pay you a bunch of money over the next 5 or 10 years. So Herod is named king of the Jews by the Roman Senate, but he doesn't have a kingdom yet. The Parthians have run him out of Galilee, and they've captured his brother who's died in captivity. And Mattathias Antigonus is the high priest and ruling as king of the Jews in Jerusalem. Herod says, yeah, but with the backing of a few Roman legions and my own mercenary cavalry, we can fix all of this. Takes him 3 years. With troops from Mark Antony, he conquers Jerusalem, he executes Mattathias Antigonus, and he is recognized as king. That's how Herod comes to be king of the Jews. He is now 36 years old. Still quite young, although older than Alexander was when he died, but successful. And he marries Mariamne, who's the granddaughter of Hyrcanus II, that successful Hasmonean. She's a princess. She's descended from the Maccabees. She has the royal pedigree. Herod's a convert. He's an Idumean. He identifies as Jewish, but the Jews who are the descendants of Jacob, the 12 tribes, kind of go, yeah, you're not really, It's not even, you got to have 3 generations buried in the graveyard. It's like, you're not descended from the Jewish nation, from the patriarchs. Here it says, oh, but I am a Jew, and now I'm the king of the Jews, thanks to the Romans and thanks to Mark Antony. And to establish and cement my claim, my wife is a Maccabean princess. She is the granddaughter of Hyrcanus II. Here's the genealogical chart of Herod the Great. I told you it was a mess. You can sit and study this for a long time. It is a mess. So here are his wives, his 10 wives. Here are not all of his children, but some of his children. And then here are his grandchildren. And just to make things sort of maximum possible confusion in names and historical records, not all of his children, but a lot of his children take the name Herod. So you have Herod the Great, then you have Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, Herod Philip, Herod Agrippa the first, and Herod Agrippa the second. And they all get mentioned in the New Testament. They don't always distinguish who is who. Herod the Great probably dies in the year of the massacre of the innocents in Bethlehem. So the Herod that is referred to at the time of Jesus' arrest and trial is, let's see here. Here we go. No, he tried to kill Jesus as an infant. Herod Agrippa the first. There we go. Yes. Imprisoned Peter, executed James the son of Zebedee. Why don't they have who presided over his trial? Herod Antipas is the one whom John the Baptist tangled with. John the Baptist rebuked this marriage because Herod Antipas had married his niece, who was also married to one of her uncles before. Yeah, I know. It's like a Kentucky genealogy. What can I say? Sorry. Yeah. Insert you might be a redneck if joke here. So yes, here is Antipater, his oldest son, by his first wife Doris. He divorced her when he married Mariamne. She has 2 sons, Alexander and Aristobulus. They wind up being sent to Rome when they're about 10 years old. They are raised in Rome, educated in Rome. They actually are welcomed into the household of Caesar Augustus. They live with Caesar Augustus from the time they're about 10 till the time they're about 18 or 19 years old. So they get a Roman classical education. They speak Greek, they speak Latin, they speak Hebrew. Unfortunately, you notice, killed by Herod, killed by Herod, killed by Herod. He marries a Samaritan woman. That doesn't make him popular with the Jews, you can imagine. But he has children by them, and they wind up in position. He marries Mariamne of Jerusalem, not to be confused with Mariamne of Idumea. And he marries Cleopatra, not that Cleopatra, a different Cleopatra, Cleopatra of Jerusalem. Philip the Tetrarch, he gets mentioned in the New Testament as well. And interestingly enough, Herod decided from, reading the Old Testament that he might as well emulate David and Solomon. And he's not serial polygamist. He is a just straight up polygamist. After Mariamne's death, he executed her. When he marries the Samaritan woman, he brings Doris back because he has, 12 palaces, so he can kind of keep them apart. But he's living with all of them. Here's another way of representing that. This goes from bottom to top. Whoa! That was not good. Instead of top to bottom, oh dear, that was my HDMI cable. That's not good at all. Well, you'll have to look over my shoulder, I guess. Yeah, I can look here. All right, 10 wives, 15 grandchildren, 12 recorded grandchildren. That chart goes from bottom to top. You see the wives there, and the sort of bands on that are the wives, the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, going from bottom to top. And almost all of those are mentioned in the New Testament. And they don't always clearly distinguish between them. His Roman connections. We've already made reference about his Roman connections. His father originally supported Pompey, who was on the losing side of the controversy with Julius Caesar, and switched to Julius Caesar after Pompey's death. Very adroit, very clever. Helps Julius Caesar conquer Egypt. Got that appointment for himself and his two sons. After Julius Caesar's death, Antipater, Faisal, and Herod ally with Mark Antony, but of course Antipater is killed almost the next year. And then it's Faisal and Herod, but they are definitely allies of Mark Antony. After Mark Antony's death, because he's defeated by Caesar Augustus, Herod very adroitly says, oh, we have a new first man in Rome? Well, I'm his friend now. And actually wins his favor. He allies himself with Octavian, with Caesar Augustus, and is given grants, recognized as king of the Jews. It doesn't hurt that he helps Caesar Augustus finance his military campaigns and a lot of his building projects in Rome because Herod is richer than Caesar Augustus. And you might ask, well, how could that possibly be true? Well, he inherited wealth from his father Antipater. He gets the taxes and tribute from the province of Judea, as he's the king of the Jews, and the Romans have recognized him, collects substantial revenues from that, and only has to pay a portion of them to Rome. He has his own royal estates. He owns extensive land in the Jordan Valley around Jericho, and from his time as governor in the Galilee, he owns land and plantations up there. He has olive groves and vineyards and balsam. He controls the balsam trade in the Jordan Valley around Jericho, which is tremendously valuable, and he derives a great deal of revenue from that. Caesar Augustus, Octavian, granted Herod half the revenue from Cyprus's copper mines as a reward for his loyalty. Well, precious metals in the first century are a huge source of wealth. He embarks on a huge building project in Jerusalem to refurbish and expand the temple and to make it more attractive for pilgrims to come, which he makes money from. And to facilitate Jews from all over the Mediterranean coming, he builds a new port city on the coastline. That helps his trade and helps the pilgrimage. He also makes foreign investments. He's a real diplomat. And just to illustrate his wealth, I want to go over some of his building projects. I can't show it there. Okay. Here's a map. I'm going to talk about 6 of his building projects. There are at least 18 on that map. The Caesar and Caesarea Maritima are probably the most important, but he builds a palace outside Jericho. He builds a palace at Herodium, where he actually has to manufacture a mountain. It's an artificial mountain. It's about 750 feet high, and he built it and then built a castle on top of it. It's where he's buried. Machaerus is a fortress palace. It's over on the other side. That arrow points to the name, but the dot actually shows you that it's on the eastern shore of the Dead Sea. It's also a hilltop fort. And then Masada. If you've seen Masada, you're familiar with Masada. There's a palace there that Herod built. Let's talk about his expansion of the temple and the Temple Mount. This starts about 20 BC, after he's been ruling ruling Israel for about 20 years. And of course, if you're going to rebuild the temple, he has a bit of a problem because he's not a Levite. He's not part of the priestly caste. He's really not allowed to enter into the inner parts of the building. He certainly can't go into the Holy of Holies. So how are you going to replace the building? Well, he asked the Levites to send him 1,000 priests to be trained as masons, carpenters, and overseers for the temple construction. And these 1,000 Levitical priests then supervise another 10 to 20,000 workers. Why do they need so many? Well, they built the new building in 18 months, but the courts and the walls took 8 to 10 years to complete because the temple they're replacing is the one built by Zerubbabel when they came back from the exile, replacing Solomon's temple that had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So the second temple had been on a platform. It's approximately 15 acres. Herod expanded the Temple Mount to 45 acres. It's one of the largest temple complexes in the ancient world. And his temple is approximately double the size of Zerubbabel's. Increased the height significantly, perhaps much as twice as high. So what did it cost to do all this? Josephus gives very detailed accounts of all of this. Josephus is just his History of the Jews tells quite a bit of what Herod did. The materials probably amounted to 3,000 talents. The labor, probably another 4,500 talents. Of the 3,000 talents spent on materials, which were sandstone, limestone, granite, wood, brass, copper, all of the materials needed, and a lot of gold. It had a gold exterior band around the top. And recall, if you didn't already know this, it's worth doing the math. A talent of silver is the equivalent of 6,000 denarii. And you may know from looking at the New Testament that a denarii is sort of the common coin of the first century. A denarii is essentially a day's wage. Now, it's a day's wage for a skilled worker. For just a laborer, half a denarii. We know from records of the Roman Empire that legionnaires, soldiers in the Roman army, got paid 250 to 260 denarii a year, which is basically 1 denarii for every day that they are on duty. So they are on duty 6 out of 7 days, times 52 weeks. Yeah, somewhere between 250 and 300 denarii. So a day's wage for a skilled laborer. Well, how much would that be? Well, 1 talent of silver, 6,000 denarii, it works out to be about $1 million. So when you get Jesus' parable of the talents, where the master is giving talents to his servants to invest or take care of while he's gone, when he gives the one servant 5 talents and 1 3 and 1 1, the 5 talents is $5 million. Here's $5 million. Do something with it while I'm gone and let me know when I come back. So how much did the temple cost? Well, the temple was a $7.5 billion project. It's an incredible feat. Here's the reconstruction. I can't see it there. Okay. There's Zerubbabel's temple on the left and Herod's temple on the right. So Zerubbabel's temple actually had to be torn down so they could build the second one. And they tore the structure down and rebuilt the new structure in 18 months. Because they insisted that, we need as short a space of time where the Holy of Holies is not existent. We need to have the Ark of the Covenant, everything cannot be exposed and open to view. So we have to build as quickly as we can. 18 months. There's a reconstruction of what that looked like. And say it's 3 times the size of the platform of the second temple. This is Herod's temple, so-called third temple. And one interesting detail about this model is actually just outside Jerusalem. It's a very famous scale representation of what Jerusalem looked like in the first century. You see that large structure up in the upper right-hand corner. You may have actually heard it referenced in the New Testament, because it's mentioned several times, the Fortress Antonia. It's not a Roman fortress. It's the Fortress Antonia because Herod named it in honor of his friend, ally, patron, Mark Antony. And it was where Mark Antony would be hosted when he came to visit Jerusalem, which he did 3 or 4 times. But otherwise, it's Herod's palace, named for his friend, Mark Antony, and it overlooks the temple courtyard. You can see one wall of it actually adjoins the portico around the outside. The other big project of this second half of Herod's reign is Caesarea Maritima, built from 22 to 10 BC, named in honor of Caesar Augustus. Caesarea by the sea. They're constructing a new port where there is no natural port. The coastline is just south of Mount Carmel. It's just beach. There's no inlet, no natural port. There's no river. There's no harbor. So he's building an artificial harbor. He builds 2 breakwaters, 600 and 1,500 feet long, with a lighthouse and a statue of Augustus at the entrance, because it's dedicated to him. A little over a mile long city walls, an aqueduct to bring water 6 miles from springs near Mount Carmel, a seaside palace, of course, for Herod, and a Roman theater with 4,000 seats, and a racetrack for horse racing, 1,000-foot course with 10,000 seats, houses for 30 to 40,000 residents, built by 5,000 to 10,000 workers, engineers, masons, artists, and he brings people in from Greece and Rome and Asia Minor. He imports material from all of those places, limestone, sandstone, pozzolana. Pozzolana is a great mystery even now to archaeologists. Pozzolana was a Roman invention. It was a kind of cement which would set up underwater. It's hydraulic cement. We have hydraulic cement now, but it's not as good. We don't know how the Romans did what they did. We've lost the recipe. Herod hired some of the Roman engineers and construction workers who knew how to use this special, apparently it's some mixture of lime, sand, volcanic ash, and some mysterious ingredients that we haven't been able to figure out. This project cost about $3 billion. Are you getting the picture? Here's what it looks like. That picture on the right is what it, oops, sorry. How did I not get, oh. It's because I'm not controlling that. Okay, the picture on the right is what it looks like now. You can still visit the site. It's been undergone extensive archaeological. You can see the Roman theater at the bottom right corner. You see the outline of the hippodrome, the racetrack, that long oval. The artificial harbor is up toward the top. There's a little peninsula promontory. That's artificial as well. And that was where Herod had his palace. They carted stone in to build that peninsula. The palace is gone, robbed for building materials in the 2,000 years since. But the rest of the ruins are still there, and then there are some representations. The top is what one artist thinks it was like. The middle is another sort of artistic representation. That bottom is Herod's palace on the little artificial peninsula that he had built jutting out into the Mediterranean. And this, of course, was where the pilgrims, the Jewish pilgrims for the festivals at Jerusalem, now have a place to come. Of course, it's also a great merchant center with fleets carrying goods from all over the Mediterranean. And it's eventually where the Romans moved their capital. They got tired of having the capital in Jerusalem, which was rather remote. It took a day or two to get to it from the coastline. Caesarea Maritima, much more convenient. Roman galleys can go in and out very quickly. This is where Paul was brought and imprisoned and where he was held and where his trials were conducted, probably in that theater before the Roman governor. There we go. Here's another reconstruction. This gets a couple of details wrong. They've got the label for the hippodrome, but they're not showing it. That's approximately where it was, but the artist drawing doesn't show you what the racetrack looked like. It would have been 3 or 4 blocks of statues there. There's a forum. There's the aqueduct coming in from the north. There's the harbor. There's a lighthouse. There's a temple to Augustus. All right. Masada. Oh, wow. There had been a fortress here predating Herod. Herod decided to add a palace. And it's a palace that sits out on this promontory off the top of the rock. They constructed a wall all the way around the edge of the plateau, storehouses. There's a swimming pool, a covered swimming pool. There are Roman baths. And he only spent some time every year here, not permanently. And that, of course, figures prominently then later on in the Jewish rebellion. This was the last stand of the Zealots. They took over Herod's former palace 75 years after his death. This is where they made their last stand. The Romans besieged, and before they were about to break through those walls, the Zealots all took a suicide pact and killed themselves. Machaerus and Herodium. I've got a whole book here on Machaerus. Machaerus is that easternmost fortress palace. The two pictures on the left show you a reconstruction of what it looked like. There's what the site looks like now. That's the Dead Sea in the background. From the top of the mountain there, you can see Jerusalem. Very rugged, very easily defended site. Interestingly, his son had John the Baptist arrested here and held here. John the Baptist, when John the Baptist was executed, he was executed in this palace at Machaerus. It's now in the country of Jordan because it's over on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Herodium, I mentioned. Yeah, that's the artificial mountain on the right with gardens and a big lake there, and where he constructed his tomb. And they've located it just in the last 5 years. So now I need to finish up with a little bit about why none of his biographers think much of him. It's because of his paranoia and the ruthless executions that he carried out. He arranged for the murder of his brother-in-law, Mariamne's younger brother. Mariamne is the Hasmonean princess. Aristobulus was actually the high priest, and Herod suspected that he was a potential rival, and so he had him drowned at one of his palaces. And then, of course, the story was, well, it was an accident. But, your wife's brother, that's going to prove interesting. The husband of his sister, Salome, suspected him of plotting to overthrow him, so he had him executed. Hyrcanus II, the high priest who his father had backed, he eventually has him executed. Mariamne, His second wife, the Hasmonean princess, he suspects she is plotting to overthrow him, so he has her executed in 29 BC.
He was paranoid.
Oh, absolutely. The next year, he executed his mother-in-law because he thought she was plotting with her grandchildren, the two sons of Mariamne. He thought that whole family is plotting against me. So, yeah, Alexander and Aristobulus, his two oldest sons, who had been guests of Caesar Augustus in Rome and had come back. There's a question of whether they really were plotting to overthrow him or not. They probably were. Most of historians say, yeah, they really were going to overthrow their father. They were going to kill him because he was getting into his 60s, and they were tired of waiting. He had them arrested and executed. And then his oldest son, by his first wife Doris, 3 years later, he's suspected of plotting to kill him and overthrow him, and he had him executed. Octavian. Of course, he knew Herod, and he knew Herod's family. The two sons had lived in his household for 10 years. When Herod executed those sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, and then Antipater 3 years later, he said, you know what? It's better to be Herod's pig than his son. Which is kind of riffing off the fact that Herod's Jewish. He wouldn't kill a pig because they're not kosher. But it's also a pun in Greek. The Greek word for pig is hus, and the Greek word for son is huios. So it's better to be Herod's hus than his huios. Yeah. So first century stand-up comedy. Emperors telling jokes. Okay. But I tell you all of these details, and I was just touching lightly on them. There's lots of other details that are recorded, mostly by Josephus, about whether or not these people were plotting against him. But he believed they were. And it explains, I think, a lot about the glimpse we have of him in Matthew chapter 2. When wise men from the east show up at the end of his life, probably after he's executed his three sons, and say, where is the King of the Jews? We've seen his star. Herod's like, oh, not again. Somebody else? I thought I'd killed everybody. So his background is he believed there were constantly people conspiring against him, trying to overthrow him. And so when the wise men show and say, hey, we've seen the star of the King of the Jews. And Herod's like, oh, how interesting. Tell me more about this King of the Jews, whose birth you have foretold. I too would like to go and worship him. Yeah, which is why he questions them. And why, when they don't show back up, he orders the execution of the children of Bethlehem. This was not an aberration for Herod. This was not something out of the blue that was inconsistent with everything he had done over his 30 years of ruling as king. This was something entirely consistent with his caprices and his whims. He was in his 60s now. He was probably already extremely ill from unspecified disease that will eventually kill him, but in constant pain, probably kidney failure, perhaps even gangrene had already set in, possibly diabetes, who knows? But he was not a well man when these executions occurred toward the end of his life, and the execution of the children of Bethlehem fits into all of that. And so I think it gives us a little bit deeper understanding of that passage that's recorded in Matthew, and why the things that the wise men say to him set him off the way they do. They suddenly make more sense, and why his actions after the visit of the wise men are so paranoid and brutal and tyrannical, because that's who Herod was. Rich, a creator, a builder, the Second Temple, Caesarea, 15 other palaces that we still have traces of. But in the end, dies a tragic, sad, lonely death in spite of his 10 wives. So, questions? Does that help you understand? That help you position Herod in the history of the first century BC, the decades leading up to the birth of Jesus? Jesus is probably born in 4 BC. They didn't calculate the numbering of the years for... Herod died in 4 BC. And that's probably the year Jesus was born. So the massacre of the innocents is probably something that Herod ordered just before his death.
Explains why the wise men were suspicious of his motives.
Yeah. The wise men might have heard stories about Herod by the time they got to Bethlehem, going, yeah, we've come from Babylon, from Persia, but we spent a little time in Jerusalem, and they've been telling us things about Herod, so we don't think we're going back. Yeah, he certainly had a reputation by that time. But it also, I think, underscores in the fullness of time, in the period where for 3 centuries, Greek culture, literacy, and literature had spread, Roman political control had established peace throughout the Mediterranean. They referred to it now as their lake. And even though Herod's life is so chaotic and tragic and complicated, it's providential in every sense of that word that Jesus is born right in the year that he dies. All right, I got 701. Next month, it's not there. Next month, we're going to do Charles the Great. Charlemagne. Yeah, he's not French. He actually probably should be called Karl der Große, because what the language he spoke would have been Germanic. He's king of the Franks, and it doesn't become France for another 3 or 4 centuries after his death. So we'll talk about him. He is born in the 700s, dies in the 800s, and expands the territory of the Franks to begin to rival the Roman Empire. The territory he eventually controls really can legitimately be viewed as a revival, at least in Western Mediterranean, Western Europe, a revival of the Roman Empire in the darkest of the Dark Ages. There is a phenomenon known as the Carolingian Renaissance while he is the ruler. And we'll talk about his history, how he got to be king of the Franks, and what he accomplished in his life. So thank you for coming. I hope you will come again next month.
Absolutely.
We'll have this video up online in a couple of days.
Yeah, that must have made sense for some really awkward family reunion.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.